Okay, so I've actually changed computers. I'm on my better laptop, and I'm gonna go ahead and start the demo. And again, I'm gonna be explaining all the steps as I go. That way, you get an idea of what my knowledge level and skill level is with .NET Core and the things I'm gonna cover in this demo. So let's get right into it. I kind of have I've actually gone through this already and kind of created a cheat sheet so I can I'll do a little bit of copy and paste just for the sake of time, but I kind of have a cheat sheet here of the steps I'm going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up a Docker image of SQL Server 2017, so I have a database to work with and play with. So I usually can't remember this command all at one time, so I'm going to copy and paste that. I'm going to go into my PowerShell. I've already pulled the SQL Server 2017 image down. It's this SQL Server Linux, and this is actually going to be running in Linux. I have Linux containers enabled on my computer here, so this doesn't take very long to spin up at all. So let me make sure it's up and running. It is. So let me make sure I remember what port I assigned that to. 1401. I think I put the password wrong. So SQL Server was spun up from the image, and it spins up really fast. So I'm going to create my database. I'm just going to call it Interview DB because that's so original. Go ahead and set it to simple recovery. I don't need to store all those entries in a log file on this demo database. So I'm going to create a new table. I'm just gonna have like a simple employee table here. Give it some columns. Okay, address, city. And phone number. Okay. Make this my primary key. I'm going to also make this an identity column. Okay. So we got our database and table set up. So I'm going to create a solution. Actually, just going to create a blank solution and add I'm going to put this here. I'm just going to call this interview demo. Okay, usually what I like to do, it really isn't needed for this example because it's so simple, but I usually like to create a database project and have my database completely under version control. So I'm going to do that. It doesn't take very long to do. I'm just going to create a SQL Server project. I'm going to import the database. And this is going to basically read the database schema and structure and import that into this project. And this again, so I have my database under source control, which is kind of overkill for this because again, it's only one table. So I just got that out of the way. And then let's go on to our next step here. I am going to create a .NET Core or a .NET Standard portable class library that I'm going to be using to scaffold my database into and create my database context that I can use in my API. So we're going to go new project, .NET Standard, and I'm just going to call this, because this is core functionality, I'm just going to call it core, just for lack of a more creative name. I'll let my NuGet packages restore, which that's complete. I'm going to delete this out. I don't really need it. So okay, so I'm going to actually just add a class back. Okay, I'm going to scaffold my database, and it takes a couple of steps to do that. I have a I created a snippet that's in my Visual Studio so I can remember the steps to do it, because I usually can't remember it every single time. So basically what I'm going to do is follow these steps to scaffold my database. I need my NuGet package console. And I'm going to add these NuGet packages. That's the right one. These install fairly quickly. Oops. Okay. So now I'm going to scaffold my big one table database. I'm going to have to alter this a little bit. Local, what's 1801 is the port. I think I need to have that way. Actually, I didn't. And I'm not going to be using a trusted connection. And normally you wouldn't probably want to have every single table all the time. This only has one table, but I'm going to go ahead and specify it anyway. So that looks good. Wait, actually that doesn't look good. I think I got to put my folder in here. Yeah, one thing I do notice, and I have a fix for this. This last NuGet package, for some reason, it shows that as an exception. But this is really only needed for the scaffolding phase, and what I usually do when I'm done is I'm going to go ahead and just comment this out. That way that issue goes away. Okay. I think I'm going to have to stop this. Sometimes that scaffold command doesn't work, so you have to relaunch Visual Studio. I should have probably copied and pasted that command because I think I'm going to have to type it in again. Yep. Okay. Alright, what the fuck is this? Okay, I think I need to make this my startup project. All right, we're going to cut this. Okay, so now I'm going to create my API. Okay. API, that all looks good. I'll let my NuGet packages restore. I'm going to set this as my startup project. So what I want to do now is I'm going to create a .NET Standard class library that I'm going to use that can be reused between multiple projects and platforms. So new project, .NET Standard. I'm just going to call it core because it pertains to core functionality of okay. So I'm going to create my I'm going to create a .NET Standard project that will contain my model for my database and my data access context. Normally, I would create classes or models for my API. I wouldn't typically use the database model as the model for my API, but because this is such a simple example, I can get away with that. Interview, demo, I'm going to call it core because this is core functionality. Actually, that was the wrong thing. .NET Standard. Okay, so there's a couple of steps to scaffold out your database. I actually added it as a snippet to my Visual Studio, or to Visual Studio, so I wouldn't have to always look it up, or it's an easier way to look up. So actually go into package, NuGet Package Manager, Package Manager Console. So I want this, paste it. And this last one will usually, it has an exception of some kind, but I only really need it long enough to scaffold out my database, and then I'll just comment it out in the CSproj file. But that last one has an error for some reason, but I'll take care of that. I better create a folder that my one model will go in. So the table, I only got one table. I could leave this off, but it's usually a good idea. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a whole entire database scaffold, and that's probably not usually optimal. Interview DB. And we'll scaffold that. Okay. So this creates the model from the database, the one table that I have. It also creates the data, the DB context. There's a couple of more things I need to do. This I don't need. And I do need to add this constructor. And then I will need to add this context to my API. And I will add that in my startup. That goes into my configure services. And I'll guess I also need to add my reference to that. And then I'll have to add some usings. If I can get my mouse over here. Okay. So I have that. And then, like I was saying, what I'm going to do is go back to my core, and I am going to edit the CSproj file. I'm just going to comment this out. That way it doesn't throw that issue. So my that should all be good now. One thing I am going to do, I'm going to create another .NET Core. Usually I wouldn't have my models for my API and my models for my database. They're usually separate. And to kind of simulate that, I think what I'm going to do is create another .NET Standard project. I'm going to call this Interview Demo Data Access. And I don't need these anymore. There's the other one. I am going to edit this and copy and paste it in. The nice thing about .NET Core, NuGet packages are they're more of a package reference. You don't have to have all the dependencies. You just have the top level, and that actually takes care of bringing everything else in. Actually, when I do that, it's going to add those NuGet packages in as if I had added them through Package Manager or looked them up in NuGet. So I'm good with that. So I'm going to take from my model, I'm going to take my context, copy it, paste it into here. And let me minimize a few things here so I don't get, so it's easier to navigate. I do need to change a few things here, I guess, that I missed when I copied and pasted that in. Reference that. Okay. this out. Alright. So let's just do a sanity check here and make sure this stuff builds. Okay, that built. This should build. And my API. Gonna need my data access layer. I'm gonna have to probably go into my startup and fix this using. Okay. So we're getting things going here pretty well. This should build. So one thing I need to do is add my connection string, this default connection string, and I'm going to use a construct of .NET Core to put my connection string in what's called manage secrets. That way, when if I check this into source control, I don't have those sensitive or secret passwords, API keys, secrets, whatever, because you know, for security reasons, you don't really want those kind of things to be set up in or to get stored in your source control where those could be possibly compromised. And there's this nice new feature in .NET Core where you just go down and say manage user secrets, and it will create basically a file outside of the structure of this project. It actually, let's see if I can remember where that's at. It's app data, I think, Microsoft user secrets. I think that's it, yeah, because that was created just a little bit ago. And this works with the app settings hierarchy. These basically act like environment variables which will override the app settings or the app settings environment.json files I have in here. Now, usually you'll put all your stuff in here and leave them completely out of here. What I like to do is stub them out, but leave the sensitive information out. Actually, I'm going to have to look that up here. Alright, we're going to pause that. So, again, I like to stub that out, and this is another one of those things I always have to look them up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the sensitive information out of here. But I like to have them in here. That way, for a developer, if another developer comes along and they need to work on this project and they clone the repo down to their local machine, they're not going to know what settings need to be in here. But if I stub them out and remove all the sensitive information, they should be able to know what that information is. If not, they can easily get that from another developer. But at least this way, most likely they're going to know what databases they should be testing and developing against. but they at least have the settings in here to know what they need to add in their secrets.json file. So what I'm going to do is basically take that and just copy and paste it. And now I actually will put in that sensitive information, because this will be outside my source control. So there's my server and port. Database name. SA, which is something you should never be using. And then this setting will then override the app settings in my project. So I can close that. I can close this. So I basically have the preliminary stuff all set up. So now what I'm going to do is scaffold out my controller for that employee, and that will handle the CRUD operations, your get detail, post, put, delete. Although you should really never actually delete data. It should be like a logical deletion where, and I didn't include it in my database, but you would usually have metadata that would say like active or indated, created by, created date, updated by, updated date. Some of that metadata, I didn't really put that in here. So let's scaffold out that controller, and I want to add new scaffolded item, and it's going to be an API controller, API controller entity framework. And it's going to run me through a wizard here. I'm going to select my employee, my database context. Employee's controller is good. Actually, I think I need to build this. At least you used to have to do that in .NET Framework. You had to build it first before the scaffolding would work right. So employee is the model. Again, this is the database model. Normally I would create a model specifically for my API, because usually those are not going to match exactly. You know, usually that one model in your API may be several models in your database, because the data gets stored in multiple tables. So this all looks good. It's going to generate all this. Only takes a couple seconds, or 10 to 20 seconds. And the scaffolding usually gets you about, about 75–80% where you need to be. It does a lot of the kind of bulk heavy lifting and stubs everything out pretty good. So I should actually really be able to run this now and see some, well, I won't have any data in it now, but I can actually run this. So I'm just going to, I got this set in my startup project. So let's do a first run and just see if anything blows up. And I guess, yeah, there will be by default that values controller that when you create this project, part of the template is that, and all it does is return some hard-coded values. This value 1, value 2 is a string array. So back to my browser. So what I'm going to do is change it to employees, which should really come back with nothing, because I have nothing in my database. I'm going to use a tool called Fiddler. There's other tools. Postmon is another really popular one. I just got when I started, I was using Fiddler. I kind of like it because it's more of a real lower level. It doesn't do hardly anything for you, so you have to really put everything in so it's easy to know exactly what's going on. Postmon will do a few things for you that are kind of a little bit hidden, and if you don't know, that can kind of throw you off. So that's how I got kind of used to using this. Plus, it has some other tools, like if you're pulling down base 64 data, you can take that base 64 encoded string and decode it and then save it out to a file so you can see what that binary file is. But there's all these transforms that you can do, and there's some other tools in here, but this is the one I've gotten used to using the most. So let me go back to here. I'm going to copy this out of here, and we're going to do a get, and this again should just return empty data. So let's actually do a post and put some data in it just to kind of populate it and get it going a little bit. So the content type will be application JSON. Employee ID, I obviously don't have to submit or put in the request because it's going to get added in the database. So let's just start last name. I'll put myself in here. I probably better not, for safety reasons, not put my if this is out on the internet, I probably shouldn't put my real information on here. So we'll go with this original. Street address, city. And zip. Why not? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Something really original. So, this should work, unless I got a column or attribute name wrong, which it looks like I didn't because it seems to have added it. And I got my employee ID of 1, which is just the first identity number. So that's working. Real quickly, what I'm going to do is add a little bit of data validation. Go to my model. Just for sake of time, I'm going to not do all of these, but they're really all required. If I can spell. And I'm going to use these data annotations to do some data validation, so that when I submit, when I do a request to my API, if the model doesn't validate, it'll throw back an error. I'm not going to get too involved with this, but let's see. String length. I have 50 bytes for that varchar. Just for grins and giggles, I'm going to make it 15 as the max length, and just to demonstrate that Okay, how does that work? This is another one of those things. I usually have to look it up because it's hard to... okay. So I would have probably put these on the rest of them. I think there's actually a special data annotation for phone number. You can use regular expressions, but just for this example, I'm just going to put it on last name. Build it. I could have just ran it as a shortcut and it would have built it anyway. So now if I go in here and I'm just going to change the name, I should get a 400 bad request, and in there I should see, okay, last name is required, and that's because I just kind of renamed the element. You know, all your 400 level errors or all your 400 results typically mean that the client did something wrong, the data was wrong, authentication was wrong, stuff like that. Your 500 status codes mean something on the server went wrong and that it's the server that's got the problem. So let's try my other data validation. So I'm going to put this back, but this time I'm just going to make this at least 15. I should get a 400 again. This time it should be max length is 15, which was my data annotation that I put in. So we got some simple validation going. So that's all well and good. Actually, let me I'll add a few more people. We'll put some more real original data in here. We'll just make this Beverly Hills. CA. And of course, every phone number in Hollywood in the movies always starts out 555 something. So let's add that one. So now I should have 2 entries in my database. So far so good. Let's do my get operation. So before it was just an empty string that I was getting back. Now I should have 2 JSON objects. This is the raw view. Just in Fiddler, if you switch it to JSON, it kind of pretty prints and formats it for you, so it's easier to read. But so far, so good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add some. Let's see. Let me look at my cheat sheet so I know what I'm doing here. So we're going to add. We're going to secure the API, and I have. That's another one. I usually have to look it up. I can't usually do it from scratch. So what I'm going to do is, in my API, my controller, I'm going to create a new controller. This is API. It's going to be empty. I'm just going to call it authorize. Now, normally I would use like, you know, you could use some kind of password, user ID password backing store like ASP.NET Identity. You can use Active Directory, OAuth 2 providers. Usually that's what I would do, is actually have an OAuth authentication and authorization server, and I would actually put this controller in there, and then I would hook this protected resource to it. But just for example purposes, I'm going to do it this way, so it's a little bit simple. And I'm going to have to do a little bit of copy and paste magic from something I've done before. I'm definitely going to need that. Actually, I'll clean this up when I get it over here. I think I might have. Okay. So let's do that. And I'm gonna have to get these usings going here. Then my configuration is, again, that's going to be .NET Core has its own IOC container for dependency injection. Let me do some more cleaning up here. So I'm going to have to add that. Private. Actually, I guess the wrong place. I'll have to add the constructor. Assign it to that variable. So there's my dependency injection. We're going to use, you know, a typical construct, which is JSON tokens, or JSON web tokens. Let's see here. We're just going to use something real simple, just the kind of a user ID and password. Again, I'm not going to be checking this against any kind of, you know, backing password store. It's just a very simple example. That looks pretty good. So I need to add that to my middleware and my startup. class. Again, I'll have to fix my usings. Okay. So I'm going to, again, this is one of these security keys. Again, that's one of those values that's a secret value that I wouldn't normally put in my source control. But I'm going to stub it out so I have it. And let's see, that was that. And let's see, I actually wrote this application before, so I'm just going to use what I had for that. The power of copy and paste. Actually, I will put that there. Then my secrets. That way this is completely outside of my source control. Make sure I got that right. Okay. So that looks good. So those settings will override that. So what I'm going to do is, this is now a protected resource. I'm going to protect the whole controller. You can do it by individual methods, the actions of the controller. I'm going to put it on the entire controller. So let's do a sanity check here. That values controller I'm not messing with. That should come up. But now when I do a get, we'll just do that. I'm going to get this 401 unauthorized, which is what I want. Or if I even tried to do the, if I did another put or a post, I'm going to still get that 401 error because now I've added authentication. I'm not really doing any authorization. I'm not doing any groups or policies or roles. It's really just an all or nothing token access. So what I'm going to have to do is I'll have to get my token, and by that I will go to my authorize controller, a post, and for grins and giggles, I'm going to make sure this works by putting in something wrong first. And this should come back as a 401 not authorized because in my code it's very simple. It's just checking against this. It's if it doesn't match, it falls through and returns as unauthorized. Otherwise, I'm going to get a token, and that token will be alive for 5 minutes. I'm just doing that for an example. Usually, you would never want it longer than 24 hours for security reasons. That way, if the token were to be compromised, mid-flight between client and the API, it's only good for a while. Usually, I set them for 60 minutes. And that seems to be a value that you see a lot in examples on the internet. So let's go back to Fiddler and let's actually authenticate with the actual correct credentials. So it's A. Sheely, I believe, is what it was. And then another wonderful, unique value. So that worked. And what I will have is my token. And this is alive for 5 minutes. So what I'm going to do is, and what you do in your client code is you would be then using this for subsequent requests. So I'm going to go back and do that get method that you have to be authorized for that I'm not. So what I'm going to do is authorize bearer and then my token. And I need to delete this part off of it. Now just for, again, just to test around, I'm going to put that X in there. So the token wouldn't be valid. So again, you get this not authorized. So let me get rid of that. Now I should get my 200. Ooh, I didn't. Okay, what happened? I think that's authorization. I think I messed up there. Okay, that's not right either. Oh, okay. I think I didn't get the whole thing copied. Let's try this one more time. I think it is authorization. And I don't need that double quote. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, I had to look that up. I think I missed something in my startup. That should make all the difference in the world. So let's try this again. And I'm going to get a new key. Okay. And delete out. That looks good. So I also put in my content type application JSON. Let's see what happens now. Shoot, what the hell? It's authorize or authorization. I can't. Am I actually doing that? Authorization. There we go. Finally. That's one of the reasons why I use Fiddler, is because it stores your requests because sometimes it's I misspell stuff or whatever. But so I'm now getting my values. So we got some simple authentication going. So let's move on. Another thing I like to do when I create APIs is add versioning to it. That way, if I need to make changes, and this is all dependent on the situation. Maybe you don't have to do this, but if you're in a situation where multiple people are using your API, this is a way you can upgrade your API without forcing it to be like a hard stop where everybody has to update all at the same time. This gives them the ability to slowly migrate as needed, and you can eventually mark older versions of the API as obsolete. And again, these are all really easy to add. They're just NuGet packages. Go into my package manager here. Next, we're going to switch to my API. Install. And configuration services. Configuration services. And this is, this, and I'm also going to add Swagger to it for like API documentation. That stuff's all really easy to add. And we're going to do it piece by piece here just so I can show you. So that I can, again, so you get an idea of what my knowledge level is. So we just put this towards the top here. Actually going to put it right here. Comment out this old route statement. We're going to make it version 1.0. So now when I go back, if I do this again, it's going to fail because it's going to say something to the effect of not found, or it'll say something about versioning. But so all I really have to do now is, because we made this version 1.1, is we just add our version 1. And we're back in business. Now that token's good for 5 minutes, so after a while here, that token will no longer be valid. But this is pretty much a very common construct you see in APIs out there. So let's keep going with the example. We're going to add Swagger to the API, which is very helpful. And it's kind of very similar. It's a NuGet package. Add that. This goes into the startup into the pipeline. Fix that using. Okay, we'll just call it that. Title interview API. That works. And then this needs to go into the configure method. This looks good. And one thing with Swagger, there's a client tool called I think it's REST what is it? I can't REST API, but it works with the Swagger JSON file, which kind of describes the API, and that allows you to kind of create proxy codes similar to the old SOAP-based endpoints where you could it would build out a proxy for you in Visual Studio. It's kind of along the same lines of that, but I've never actually used it because that's the beauty of RESTful APIs. They're so easy to call and use and consume. There really isn't much of a need for that. So I think that's all the steps I need to do for, yeah. Again, this stuff adds on pretty simple. So let's run it. And of course, this is where that you're getting the API version, because the default, which is in Visual Studio, launches to that. So let's bring up our Swagger. Okay. Okay, wait a minute. Okay. I think maybe. Okay, I'm back. Had to take a little detour. Apparently there's a new version of Swagger, the NuGet package, and I had to add some code in here to handle my JWT, my Java Web Token. But I got that working, so I had to take a little time out for that. That was a change that they added, but so I have that now working. So we'll resume with where we're at. So we're going to load the website. And I have the setting to where the default URL takes you to the Swagger page. This basically gives you a layout of like help around what methods are available, and you can actually run them. So the first thing I would have to do is authorize myself, and my version of the API is 1. So I'm going to put in my I could actually do this through Fiddler and then just copy and paste that token that gets generated, but we'll do it this way. And there's ways to have controllers not show up in your documentation on your Swagger site. So we got my token. I'm going to copy and paste it. And what would happen is if I just tried to run the employee, I'd put in version 1, execute. I'm going to get this unauthorized because I didn't have my token. So what you do is that token goes in here, and this basically gets put into the HTTP header. So I'm going to put bearer and that, authorize, close, and now when I run that again, I get my 200 OK. Here's my response. Those are the 2 people I have added to my site, or to my through my API. But Swagger is a pretty nice way to have that documentation for your API. So that's basically that. I could also add, and for some reason I think this is maybe a bug in the Swagger control. It's like you have to click on them twice at first for some reason. But so I'm going to add an employee, or an employee through Swagger. I actually don't need employee ID. We'll call this example, last name, first name, Swagger, 111 Southwest First. We'll go with Holton, Kansas. I have no idea what their zip code is, so we'll just do 66611. Phone number will be creative and 111-222-1234. So we'll do my execute. I got 201, which, you know, the 200 response codes mean it went okay. My employee ID is 3. I should see 3 employees. I got that. That all looks like it populated correctly. I could actually go back to my Swagger page and do the get. And I would now have my 3 employees again. I could run this in Fiddler. And there's my 3 employees. So moving along with our demo, we got Swagger done. So what we're going to do is we're going to add Microsoft Application Insights to it, and then we're going to deploy it. So deploy it. I'm going to deploy it locally in IIS. I'm also going to do Docker. And I'm also going to put it out to the cloud because it doesn't take very long to do those things. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to go into Azure Portal. And if you're not familiar with Azure Portal, it's actually pretty easy to use. I'm going to put all this stuff under a resource group. In Azure, things are associated under resource groups, and that way when I delete the resource group, it'll delete everything underneath it. So I'm just going to create a new resource group called Interview Demo. You can actually have Insights run locally. It'll actually store it locally. I'm just going to go ahead and push it out here to Azure, how you would normally do this. So I've got my the resource group doesn't take long to put together. I'm going to create a resource, application insights, going to create, let's call it API Insights. It is an ASP.NET web application. That's right. I want to use my resource group. South Central US. Create it. Okay, I guess you can't have spaces in that. That's right. So that's going to create and provision that. Usually this takes a little while to build. So that's out there now. So I have my API insights. So it's pretty easy to add that. All you really have to do is right click on this connected services. I'm going to add a connected service. I'm going to do application insights. And I want to get started. I want to sign in. I want to sign in with my Azure account. And basically it's going to look at my account, and I can choose my resource I create. You can actually just have it create a new one from scratch. So so that's the one I created. Again, I could have had it create one from scratch. That all looks right. I mean, this is pretty much a simple addition. It kind of does everything for you. It puts in some settings into your startup. If this was an MVC application, it would put some code snippet or a code snippet into your views and the shared layout view that helps collect diagnostics for the client side. Since this is an API, there really is no client side. I don't really need to use the SDK. I'm not going to do anything really above and beyond just wanting to grab the telemetry information. So I'm going to close these windows, and there's a way you can, let's see. Going to run it. And it might take a minute or two for it to really start showing up information for application insights, but you should be able to, you have this button here, and this can kind of show you locally. It's actually connected to the portal, but it shows you some of the telemetry information. You can see all the things that are going on. That will actually now start being out on the portal. So if I go into App Insights, like I said, it takes a couple minutes before it really starts registering data. So I may have to come back to this in a little bit to show that. So if I did, I just do some activity, it should start showing up here. Yeah, I think what we'll have to do is come back to this in a couple minutes, because it will take a while for it to start detecting. Yeah, it's starting to get information now. Usually what I look at in App Insights are usually failures, performance, availability, and like I said, you can set up alerts for if things exceed certain limits, certain thresholds, to give you that proactive ability to monitor your website. One thing, see if my live metric stream is starting to work. Yeah, this will eventually. I'll come back to that later, but there's tons of stats and metrics that you can get. Application map is kind of interesting. It kind of shows you kind of a logical layout of your application. I think I'll have to come back to this later because it's still kind of loading up. But on with our demo. So I've tested it in Fiddler and showed all that. I'm going to deploy it to IIS. I have a Windows 2016 GUI VM that I'm going to deploy my application to. We'll start this up. I've already configured this VM a while ago. This is just going to be a simple deployment using IIS, probably the typical way you would be running it. So I'm going to create a folder. We're going to call it interview demo is the site. I'll go ahead and go into IIS and configure it. So I'm going to create a new site. We're going to call it interview demo .com. And we'll put it there. Let's start. It's going to create an application pool. I need to make a change in that. Because this is .NET Core and it runs in its own Kestrel web service, all that IIS is really being used for is a reverse proxy and to handle encryption and stuff like that. So I'm actually put no managed code, 32-bit application. There's a little bit of a performance boost you get by doing that. I'll leave everything else as is. I'm not making this a web garden or anything like that. So So we've got that. So we're gonna publish this to a folder. I'm just gonna call it dtemp deploy interview demo. I'm going to basically take all the options and it's going to start publishing out to that. It's going to do a release build of the application. And so we have that. And it's really just a copy and paste. I will have to put in my configuration settings, which I will get from my secrets. And that will be in my app settings JSON file. So I am apologizing for skipping around here. I need my manage user secrets. I'm just gonna do this number here. I need that comma. So save that. Well, we'll have to change that local. So I need my let's see, this is I think I just called it host name. There we go. So MSI is my laptop name. Let me make sure I can ping my laptop, even though this is on the same laptop. That way I can hit the database. Let's try it with TCP/IP4. Okay, that looks good. So I think I can just do this, and everything else should be fine. Save that. Let's go into IIS. Just for grins and giggles, let's restart it just so I get a fresh start. And let me see something here. Interviewdemo.com. So actually going to, I could put it in a, I have to request that with that site name. So what I'm going to actually do is I have a DNS server that I use for this kind of little testing. Okay. Interviewdemo.com. And I happen to know the IP address of that is so now I should get interview. Okay, let me see something. That's not even what I wanted. Okay, something's not. Okay. What the? Okay. Okay, I don't know why I couldn't deploy to IIS. That was the first time I configured that server, so I'll have to go back and check that as to why that didn't work. What I was wanting to demo anyway was to Dockerize or containerize this application. And that's pretty easy. So all we got to do is add Docker support Linux. And it's going to add a Docker file. It's going to set up an image for debugging. Okay, Jesus Christ. Okay, so I'm not sure why I couldn't get it to work on IIS. I haven't actually deployed anything onto that VM. I just created it a while ago. I'm gonna have to look into that. I'm not sure what that's about, but because I've deployed to IIS numerous times at work, and I must have missed something. I'll have to look at that. But to continue with my demo, I mean, I was actually going to deploy it several ways. The other way I was wanting to do was to spin it up as a Docker image locally, and then I'm going to deploy it out to the cloud along with the database. So I'm going to containerize the application. You just do, it's pretty simple. You just do add Docker support. I'm going to run under Linux because when I deploy it out to Azure, I'm going to use the app services for containers, and that kind of requires it requires you to use Linux containers, which again is as you know, .NET Core is multi-platform, so it can run on multiple environments. So I'm going to build a release build, and it added this project, this Docker Compose, and it also added a Docker file, which is how it builds the image. So I'm just going to set it to release build and do a build, and this will take a little while. And then when it's built, we're going to spin that image up as a running container, and it'll be out there running alongside the SQL database that I have running with my 3 test rows in there. So let's see where it's at here. It's going through here. And it does take a little while for the release build image to be created, but when it's done, I will have a image, and it'll be this this interview demo API, and it's tagged with latest. So what I'm going to do is spin that up. Now this is where I'm going to have to supply the those variables because they're not in the source code, and I will inject that into the image through environment variables. So Docker run detached. I'm going to map it to port 8080. Internally, it's on port 80. I'm going to give it the name API because it's original. Environment variable, connection strings, default connection equals, and I'm going to get this out of my secrets. Now I can't use server local because this is actually going to be like a VM, so I will have to use my IP address. So, or I don't know if I can use the name of the server or of my machine, but I'll just use the IP address 119. Actually, I think I will use my server name or my computer name. Then the other environment variable is, what was it, the security key. And this could really be any value. And the image interview demo API latest. And that's it's now spun up. And it's up and running on port 8080. I'm going to inspect that container just to... Looks like everything's there. So I'm going to open up my browser, and I should be able to just navigate to it. 8080. And there's my Swagger page again. So let's go ahead and test it. Version 1 of the API, which is the only version I have. And password 011. Okay. So I'm going to have my token here now. And so now I should be able to, let's do a get, see if I can get my data out of there. Find out if the MSI name works or not. I think I have to use the IP address because it's not looking like it's working. Which probably makes sense. So that's an easy fix. Stop. If I could spell. Docker remove image or remove container API, because I'm going to spin. With a Docker Swarm, you can change environment variables while it's running. I don't think I can do that on an individual container. So I'll just delete the container and spin it back up. 192.168.1.19. So there's my assuming I'll probably have to reauthorize. Try this again. Version 1. Oh yeah, I gotta. Okay. Version 1, execute. And we got data. That makes sense because it wouldn't be able to resolve that DNS name of MSI, so the IP address makes sense. So that looks good. So for grins and giggles, I am going to deploy this solution or this project or this application out to Docker or out to the cloud on Azure. So the first thing I got to do is I'm going to push my image out to my Docker Hub account. I mean, this is not anything special or secret, so I'll just put it out there as a private or a public image. So let's do that. I'm going to have to tag it so I can push it up to my registry. I'm just going to call it version 1. And that's going to push that image up to my Docker Hub account. It'll go pretty quick because it really only has to push up the deltas, which is the application itself. So I should have, yeah, right here. Should be within seconds, a few seconds ago. Okay. So let's push it up to the cloud. And first thing I'm going to do is have to create a database. Storage. Create a SQL database. Actually, I'll have to create a server and for it to run in, and then also the database. So database name is going to be, we'll just call it InterviewDB. That's right. Interview demo. It's a blank database. I'm going to have to create a server for it to run on. I'm just going to call it Andy Sheely. It has to be unique on Azure. We'll just use that. Okay, I must have did my password wrong. Okay. I want the cheapest I can go. It's $5 a month, so it's not the end of the world. And this will take a little while, I think, to provision. While I'm waiting on that, I'm going to create another app resource, and that is the application, which is a Dockerized container. App. We'll just call this Interview API. Okay, Sheely API. I want the cheapest. think I could have just used that same plan, but that's okay. So this is coming from Docker Hub. I think that's what I called it. Interview Demo API. So it looks like my database completed. So that'll deploy. That'll take a little while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to there's ways to migrate on-premise databases to the cloud. It's probably, I haven't done it for a year or so. It's probably even easier now. But since this is so simple, I'm just going to create a script and deploy it out there. So first thing I'll have to do is allow my IP address in through the firewall setting, so that I can connect to it from here. And I'm just going to go into SQL Server Management Studio. Admin. There's my database. What I'm going to do is take my table, script it, taking it's probably still waking up. So there's that. So and what did I call my application? It's Sheely API, that's right. So I should see my Swagger page. Might take a little while to come up here. Any year now. Actually, I do know what I forgot. I need to connect my app, put in those environment variables. So I go here. Application settings. So I need a new connection string, and this was default connection. And password 01. DB admin, and this is SQL Azure. So I then need to add my security key. Security key. And save. Okay. So let's see if it blows up. It should actually function just the way it did locally, if everything's configured correctly. And I've got my token. Now let's authorize myself. And let's do my get method. And I got nothing, which makes sense because it's an empty database. So let's do a post. And I don't need the employee ID. That's going to get added. (101) Main Street. You know, I don't know why I'm typing that in. I can just grab it from one of these. So I got my 201. So now if I do my get, I have my one employee, my one employee. If I go to SQL Server, Management Studio in the cloud, there we are. So now I am fully up in the cloud, deployed, running. I still don't know why the IIS locally didn't work. I'll have to figure that out. But we're up and running using Docker container, container services in the cloud. So we now have that up and running. So again, you know, uh, what good's an API if we don't consume it? This demo's taken quite some time, so if you want to stop, you can, but I'm going to rush through this next part. I am going to create a Xamarin mobile app that's going to use this service out on the cloud. So I'll create a new project, cross-platform Xamarin, interview demo mobile. I'm not going to do UWP, blank, .NET Standard, okay. So it's still restoring NuGet packages. One thing, it does put it out here on the wrong folder. So I'm going to move those in there. I'm going to make this my startup project. I'm not going to really mess with iOS. This demo's already taken probably more time than you're wanting to watch. I need to add internet access as a permission. Okay. Okay, navigation page. New main page. Okay. And again, this is going to be a bare bones application. Title, employees, don't need the label. I'll put in a list view. List view. And I'm going to have to do a little bit of cheating. I'm going to have to copy and paste a little bit here. Binding on refreshing true. This is going to have pull to refresh, full name, full address. I'm going to create some extension methods that will take that model, return back from the API to get that, and that's where I'm going to do my live unit testing example. So let me I'm good there. Okay, so this is where, you know, .NET Standard is the benefits of that. I am going to add a reference. So I have my model. And that'll be there. Okay, Again, do some copying and pasting. I actually wrote this application before, so I'm copying and pasting it from here. Just have to clean it up a little bit. And I'm going to create a new page for the detail. Content page, content page. And again, for sake of time here, I am going to copy and paste a little bit. This looks good. And the detail, or the code behind on this is pretty simple. It's just, I'm going to pass an employee and the constructor. And bind that to the page. That's a pretty simple one there. I'm not going to build this entire app out, but enough to show it hitting against our API that we have in the cloud. So I'm going to add a class. That's going to be my API in the cloud. So I'm now going to add a class from my data access, which will be, or really it's my API access. I'm just going to call it data access. This is going to be a, I'm going to use a pattern singleton. Let me do that again. Okay. I did hit the wrong keys. And if I could type, it'd be a miracle. Okay. So, again, I'm going to cheat a little bit and copy and paste some of this stuff. put in some usings. I do need to add Newtonsoft. So I can deserialize and serialize the data coming back. Private string token private date time alive time. That's going to be part of the data that comes back is that time that it's alive. And actually, I should have put that in my .NET Standard class, since that is being used in multiple places. I'm going to just cheat and copy and paste it for now. Normally I wouldn't have done it this way, but I should have did it that way to begin. Okay, I accidentally did something wrong there. Alright. Let's try this again. Let's call this security. Let's call it security. Because actually I'm going to replace that with two classes. Okay. Let's see here. This way I can get that token, and I'll be able to copy this. Actually, it's going to be V1. What is that? Authorization, I believe, is my, I'm calling that authorize. And base URL clear so actually this is a post. This isn't a get, so I need to do that. I am going to copy that. Let's see. Okay, that was token request. Username equals Sheely, password let's see. JSON convert serialize object token. Serialize it. Post async, and it's going to be okay. Copy this. I didn't actually use a token in the last one, or when I originally wrote this. So I'm going to copy this from something else I've done. Action, HTTP content. That looks right. I'll read that. I'm going to deserialize that. Actually, okay, deserialize. And that is token response, is what it comes back as. And so what are we calling that? Token equals turn token that alive equals date time now, add minutes, return token alive minus 1 minute. That way, we have the 1 minute less. That way we don't risk having an expired token. Okay, so let's... I think I have... Okay. A name conflict. Nope. That was wrong. There we go. Okay, so... await get token. So that'll get my token. Now I need to add an authorization to that. When I do this, bearer token, I don't need a timeout. This shouldn't take long. Okay. So that's that. And equals data access instance. E. Okay. So on refreshing, we're pulling the data. We got it. So I'm going to set a breakpoint because I'm sure this may be interesting. So I have my normally I use Xamarin Live Player, and I'm going to use the emulator. That way you can see it on the screen. And I need to make sure I can connect to this. Sometimes this emulator doesn't, I have to manually connect it, but it looks like it's good. So let's see, on my details I did forget something. Title, binding, and oh yeah, full name. which I also have to add those extension methods. That's right. So that'll be where I can show live unit testing. Let's see, public static full name this what is it? Public static string return. I'm going to do a shorthand for string format. So we're going to do employee last name, comma, space, employee first name. So there's one extension method. Let's do public static string full address this employee go to the end, turn let's see, this will be employee street address 1 space, so it's address city, comma, okay, I think that's right, city, comma, state, zip. Been at this for so long, I'm kind of going a little delirious. So we're going to do some unit testing, live unit testing. So for that, I am going to add a I guess we'll put it in here. New project. We'll just call this, yeah, I'm kind of done being creative. We'll just let it be called that. Let the NuGet packages restore. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Just going to do something real simple just to show that I know how it works. So we're going to do an attribute test method public void, and we'll just call this full name. Actually, there. Actually, I do need that. So, we're just going to do something real simple. We're going to create an employee object. Actually, I need to add a reference. And that was in the mobile. Okay, I'm just going to create a temporary object, and last name equals Sheely, first name equals Andy, and then what we're going to do is assert R equal imp my extension method, which is now it's not very descriptive name, but or message, but oh well. So now I'm just going to turn on live unit testing. And what should happen here is these should eventually show checked. Okay, I think I need to okay. So my live unit testing shows that these are covered and these check. And let's see, test. Where is the test window at? So basically, if somehow I made a change and it broke this, it would show up immediately as you're doing code. So if I did something where I put like another space, my live unit testing is going to run. It's going to say, "Oh, that didn't work," and you can find out this is the unit testing that failed, and that's because yes, I removed that space or added a space. It'll then recheck, and all is good with my unit. Now you'd obviously have unit testing for all the stuff in your application. I just wanted to show an example of it so you knew I knew, or so you knew I knew how it worked. So let's give this a try and see what happens. And eventually it should start up, I hope. So we're on the on appearing, and we're going to do the get token because we don't, this is the first time it ran, so the token is null. Hopefully this all works smoothly. And hopefully I have a... Okay, let's see what the heck happened. Okay, so something didn't go through. I'm going to run this again. And watch it raw data. Okay, there's problem number one. It's a post, not a put. Okay. Okay. Let's see what we got for a token. Hot dog, we got something. My alive time is 4 minutes from now. That looks right. So we now have my token. I'm now going to make the request to get oh, that's a problem. That should be, I'm just going to shortcut here. That needed bearer in there. I'm going to set a breakpoint here. And that didn't quite work. .404. Oh wait, I bet I didn't put my version. I guess I should have probably did this full demo as I was going to do it as a trial run. That way I don't run into all these little hiccups. But, oh well. So I should have, I can't remember how many rows I have, just the one row in there. I think that was right, yeah. So and I didn't get anybody. Okay, that don't look right. Actually, let me do this. Sometimes when you run it through debug, it will actually, I don't even need that breakpoint there. This stuff seems to work, at least on the we'll run it through without debugging it. Sometimes it seems like if it takes too long, it will okay, that still didn't work right. What am I missing? Oh yeah, I'm missing some other stuff. LV employee, full name, full address. Let's do this. And do it this way. I'm going to create properties that go with that method, or to with the model. So public this is going to be return last first name. And why is namespaces help? And public string full address. Jeez, I can't type. Although I will borrow it from my extension method. All right. This definitely is why you do a trial run exactly of what you're going to demo. Okay, I think it should work this time. Okay, it was still running. I was starting to get a little bit perturbed. So there we go. And if I click on that, there's my details. Of course, I'm not... where'd my address go? That's probably from when I did it the first time. I didn't use the name quite exactly right. I think I used street address 1. Yeah, that was it. So let's do a little pull to refresh test. I'm going to just add some data manually. And let's just add one more record row into the database. Hire me, a little bit of a subliminal message. It's my one joke for the demo. 901 Southwest Testers Road, Kansas 66611. Okay. So now I got my 3 rows in there. I'm going to do a pull to refresh. And now I have my data in there from my API, which is out there on Azure. Detail view, again, I'm not going to build out the rest of this application, but hopefully this long drawn-out demo kind of gives you an idea of what my skills and talents are. And I believe I covered everything I wanted to cover. Yep.